So, Ambassador Matt Whitaker, we want to first start by thanking you for your willingness to serve.
It's my honor. This is my third time in the U.S. Federal government. First, as a United States Attorney for the Southern District of Iowa, which is the southern half of my home state, covering my hometown in central Iowa. The second time I came back, that was in the Bush administration. The second time I came back in the Trump administration, I was the Chief of Staff at the Department of Justice, ultimately becoming the Acting Attorney General. And now I'm back a third time. Never would have thought I'd be in the federal government once, let alone 3 times. But now I'm back as U.S. Ambassador to NATO, headquartered in Brussels.
So, Matt, at the end of January, we sat down and spoke in a different setting that you live in today. We were in Miami talking about a job you were about to take on. What did you expect in this job, and what has surprised you?
Yeah. Well, I think the main thing remained the main thing from then until now, and that is to get our European and Canadian allies to step up, to equalize with the United States, and to take over the conventional defense of the European continent. Something that all the way back to Nixon, U.S. presidents have talked about, and nobody's been able to accomplish it. Now President Trump has accomplished it, at least politically, through the political commitment. Now my job is to see it follow through on those commitments and in year-over-year spending increases. I think the one thing that I probably didn't appreciate in January as I was taking the job is how much and how relevant history is to Europeans. Because in the United States, we appreciate U.S. history. We certainly study the Civil War. We study civil rights movement. All of the issues. But I don't think we don't dwell on it. We don't talk about it in conversations. We move forward. We say what's the problem in front of us, and then we attack the problem. And in Europe, it's much different. You oftentimes have conversations with your colleagues that first have to address history of borders, the history of conflict, the history of governments. There's so much context to do this job, and at the same time, I'm trying to bring my own practical Midwestern, work ethic, just to roll up my sleeves and attack the problem and sort of bring that attitude to these situations.
So it's December 4th, 2025. And something that's always makes me reflect, Matt, is Shakespeare, 400 to 500 years later, is maybe more popular than he was. And so as we go through his greatest works, they wrote about human nature, envy, jealousy, indecision. And they are manifest in generation after generation. We had a president of the United States, President Reagan, that used to go forward this idea of peace through strength. How does that look today, a generation later?
It's probably the most important principle as you think about alliances and in countries, because I think we're in a point where you have to realize that the nature of human beings and the history of human beings is not long periods of peace interrupted by small wars. It's long periods of war interrupted by small moments of peace. And so we have to first appreciate that we're not that much more advanced than maybe we were in previous decades or centuries. But at the same time, the weapons are obviously much more lethal, and where it's going from an autonomous war fighting and all of those issues certainly make it even scarier with the artificial intelligence as well. But at the same time, I think you're seeing with very aggressive players on the world stage, whether that's Vladimir Putin in Russia or kind of President Xi, who certainly has not completely signaled intentions, what he's going to do with the largest peacetime military buildup in the history of the planet. But that doesn't, that usually doesn't lead to good things. So peace through strength is important. That's the old Latin saying the Romans said, and that President Washington said, is that those that want peace must prepare for war. And so we have to be strong, and that strength is what's ultimately going to guarantee the peace. Because if we are weak, if we have a weak alliance or weak allies, that will be exploited by our adversaries. It's the way it is, especially in a world where adversaries are now coupling together, where the Chinese are supporting the Russians in their war in Ukraine, and the North Koreans are supporting the Russians as well. And it is just a world that I think is increasingly dangerous, increasingly volatile. The United States obviously has a big role to play to stabilize the situation and to stabilize the threats. But at the same time, the United States can only be so strong. We're just going to spend almost $1 trillion and maybe $1 trillion on a defense budget in this next year. That's a lot of money. But at the same time, we can't provide the defense for the entire globe and for all of our allies. So we need not only countries in Europe, but our Asian allies as well to be strong and to invest in their own defense, because that's ultimately what makes the alliance strong, and it makes the United States of America strong.
So when you accepted the offer to be the U.S. ambassador to NATO, how was that job defined to you that you signed up for?
Well, so you're the permanent representative on the North Atlantic Council, and the North Atlantic Council is the governing body of NATO, and it has 32 allies, including the United States. And so that's your role, and it's a political military alliance. So you have kind of one foot in the military defense world, and you have one foot in the diplomacy, politics, and world affairs role. And balancing that, 2/3 of my staff is from the Department of War, and half of those people, or if not more, are active duty military. And so there's a lot of military planning, a lot of military strategy and the like that we have to be able to know, in addition to politics and diplomacy, that is the day-to-day bread and butter. But it's, I'm not sure, the president wanted me to do this job because I think, by sending somebody big, bold, and intimidating, but with a charm that's palpable.
Is that your Midwest charm?
It is my Midwest charm. And I have a certain personality that I think has been very helpful to do this job, because I'm not somebody that screams and yells. As I mentioned, I'm somebody that's from the Midwest, that we're based on community, we're based on rolling up our sleeves, helping our neighbor, and really bringing a collaboration to the challenge. And that's what I've done so far in the first
So
8 months.
we're talking about the Midwest of the United States, not the Middle East, is where you came from, Matt. And so let's talk about, there's a lot of things that prepared you for this job. Mm-hmm. You went to law school.
Did.
You played on a football team, an American football team. How did those two things in your background prepare you for this job?
Well, certainly being a lawyer has prepared me to do the negotiations, the mediation, the looking for strengths and weaknesses of arguments, the understanding people's positions and the strength and the weakness of those positions, and then just being able to be a quick learner on any subject. I remember when I was a lawyer in private practice, in addition to being a prosecutor, I also had I was in private practice for a period of time, and I had clients, and I tried an arson case, and I had to learn all about fire science, something I knew nothing about, but I had to become an expert on fire science and be able to cross-examine the government's witnesses and the like. Won that trial, and ultimately, so those skills and the ability to read a lot, digest it, assimilate it, and then be able to be knowledgeable about things, I think is one skill that certainly being a lawyer has taught me. The football playing American football at a high level, I think taught me really about discipline and a stick to it attitude that, kind of you're not going to do something overnight. You're not going to build a great team overnight. You're not going to be a great player overnight. That everything builds on itself. That every day you show up and you do the work. And I think that was certainly one of the lessons that being a football player. And the thing that I look back. I study a lot of American history and a lot of people that are icons in American history, and we look back on stories of iconic American leaders. And I'm not putting myself in this category, but it's just the story of how history tells and passes history down. So you look back and you talk about like a Ulysses S. Grant, and you don't appreciate that at any given moment in his life there was a lot of doubt and uncertainty, and he had been kicked out of the Army and he couldn't feed his family in St. Louis selling firewood, and it wasn't but for the Civil War breaking out, and he was in Galena, and he's got a 100-person rifle company because of his military experience in West Point. He would have never been a figure in American history, and so some of this is just taking advantage of the opportunities. And for me, it's just been one opportunity built into the next. I think the real challenge for me was, it's having served in the first Trump administration, really got to know the President Trump very well, believe in his policies, and then supported him for the 4 years that he was out of office. I think that positioned me to not only to know him really well and to know what he's thinking, but actually be able to communicate that to our allies in a way that advances not only American interests, but also aligns it with their own interests.
So, for a student of history, Matt, Europe was at war for 1,000 years. Mm-hmm. They lived through these issues. We had the war to end all wars, World War I. We had another one, larger, World War II. Can't we just all get along?
I wish we could. I think that's, there's the famous saying, pray for peace, right? It's like we all want peace. We all want everyone to live in peace and prosperity. But for whatever reason, especially on the European continent, that has not been the history of it. The challenge we face right now is many of our European allies, and we just had a foreign ministers meeting yesterday in Brussels, and the foreign ministers came, and it reminded me of how diverse Europe is. You have in NATO, you have Turkey on the one hand, you have the Finns and the Swedes and all the Nordic countries, you have the Baltic countries, you have the big, former industrial countries of places like Germany and Italy and France, kind of the old Europe, and it's very diverse. And they took most of those countries, not all of them, most of those countries though took a peace dividend well past any time where there weren't threats. And if you look at when Russia annexed Crimea in 2014, up to and through the invasion of Ukraine in 2022, they were all still taking a peace dividend. They were still investing in their social services and their government provided health care and other social benefits, and underfunding or cutting their militaries, and that has caused a real challenge right now as we're ramping back up, as we're making people more capable, and we're saying that the United States is telling them explicitly that you need to take over the conventional defense of the European continent. And I think that there are some countries that are stepping up, and this is why it's a little asymmetric, because you got countries like Poland, you got Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, places that I've been several times each. I was just in Lithuania last week, the day before Thanksgiving, with our troops. That was an incredible experience. But those countries are already spending 5% of their GDP on their military. They get it. They're sober, and they're really thinking about the challenges and what that looks like. But then you have countries, that they would call themselves further away from the threat, that are saying that they don't need to do that because Russia's not going to roll across their border with tanks and drones. And I just think that is I think that's naive, especially when these hypersonic missiles can reach any capital in Europe within about 15 or 20 minutes. I mean, everyone is an Eastern Flank country right now in Europe, and at the same time, the way one of the issues that I'm spending a lot of time on, I know that's going to be one of your questions, but one of the issues I'm spending a lot of time on is the Arctic defense. As the sea lanes open up, as the Chinese who don't have a border with the Arctic Circle, as they start to look at the opportunities there, both for shipping and for natural resources, the Russians certainly have interests up there, and then NATO has interests. The United States, Canada, and many of our other our Nordic countries, Iceland, and the ones I mentioned earlier. I mean, it is there again. The world is getting more and more complicated. The threats are not diminishing, and Europe was late to realize kind of the challenges that we were all facing. The United States wasn't. I think the problem we did, if we have a problem, is I don't think we modernized fast enough, Mike. We didn't, whether it's our nuclear arsenal not modernizing it quick enough, or whether it's our conventional arms. We have way too many exquisite systems that are way too expensive. When the lesson right now in war fighting is good enough is going to get the job done. You don't need sort of exquisite, fancy $1 million missiles. You need missiles that can project, serious impact downrange.
What has the Russia-Ukraine war done to force the military to change its thinking? I know when I've had a chance to visit with people from West Point and others, there are dramatic changes in how they're teaching them, the role of AI, cybersecurity, obviously. We've seen a dramatic change in drone warfare today.
Yeah.
What are the lessons, and how are you reporting them back?
Yeah.
And what are the lessons we should take away from this experience?
That's a fantastic question, Mike, and we could probably spend all night talking about this because I have a lot of thoughts. I was just in Ukraine a month ago. I went to both Kyiv, and I had an opportunity to go to Kharkiv and get within 30 miles or so of the Russian border, and to see the units that are fighting on the front line to defend Ukraine. And I think the lessons learned for me was first, the United States and NATO didn't have enough connectivity to get all the lessons that should be learned from especially their defense industry and how they're innovating, how they're quickly changing modern warfare. I don't think we fight a drone war like it might look in Ukraine. We would fight much differently. We have assets that certainly Ukraine and Russia don't have. I'd look at the 12-day war, between Israel and Iran as an example of how the United States might fight a little differently, take out air defense and then aerial bombardment. But that being said, the one of the things that we need to be ready for is autonomous robots. Drones are one thing, flying drones. I think counter UAV and UAS is going to be critical to develop that, and I'm spending a lot of time trying to drive that innovation in the United States and within our alliance. And I think I've gone to demonstrations, I've gone to military exercises, I've seen what's available, I know where it's going. I feel pretty good about the trajectory of that, although it's not perfect. I think one of the things we need to really think about is how to use these robots with machine guns. It's all they are, and they're being deployed right now in Ukraine. And on the one hand, interesting technology, but at the same time, that's probably most likely going to be the front line going forward. You're most likely not going to have soldiers at the front line. You're going to have the front line is going to be autonomous robots, and then behind that will be some kind of artillery, and then behind that most likely will be your operators and your troops, and then you'll have. It's as I've studied this and I've seen the virtual simulations. It's so interesting where it's going, but again, we have to drive down the cost of all these systems, and that's what Ukraine has done very effectively. Whether it's deep strike missiles, whether it's UAVs, whatever it is driving down the cost. Because what was happening is you have these Patriot systems that are that are great systems, but just one interceptor is about $1 million or more. And to shoot down things that don't cost $1 million or more, you're going to quickly run out of money before your opponent does. And so we need to invest. And the Pentagon wasn't wired for this. We're making dramatic changes right now at the Department of War and at the Pentagon and our acquisition process. And President Trump is really, I think, gets it. Secretary of the Army Dan Driscoll gets it. Secretary Hegseth certainly understands where it needs to go, along with his deputy. But there's just a lot of work to be done because it's a change in an entire culture, Mike, as you know. I mean, the defense acquisition it has always been complicated and has not lend itself to rapid change and rapid innovation. And that's where we're going to have to get as soon as possible.
So in many ways, as you know, Matt, we opened this center for advancing this ideal of a dream of upward mobility that kind of is the American dream, but it's the UAE dream, and it's most countries' dreams. And when we think about those dreams, when you look at a continent like Africa, for example, with more than 50 countries, and they see, quote, a developed society like Europe can't stop fighting for 1,000 years. What are the lessons they're going to take away? Is this world that's developing in Africa with the countries, are they going to be repeating what Europe has done for 1,000 years?
Well, I hope not, but unfortunately, unless they have great leaders that can resolve conflict without war, then that could be a possibility. I mean, we see, there is certainly conflict right now on the African continent. There's such an opportunity. I mean, if you look at the demographic growth of Africa, it is 3 or 4 countries the projections are amazing on the one hand, and I think concerning to how that plays through society, because you're seeing irregular migration into Europe from Africa, certainly. The Sahel, which we spend a lot of time in NATO thinking about, and especially the southern neighborhood, we call that, and the countries on the south are thinking a lot about the destabilizing in northern Africa and the Sahel. And so plus with the growth, I mean they've already seen a lot of irregular immigration to Europe from Africa. We've seen it in the United States as well, not as much because again we have an ocean, but that's not as hard to get across as maybe it once was. So I think we're going to have to wait and see. I hope not. I hope that eventually we can come up with again, better leaders, institutions that can handle these types of conflicts, and better ways to resolve it. Because if we don't, I mean, we are, those that don't understand history are doomed to repeat it. So, I mean, this is going to be a very important moment in world history that we all should watch. I'm making sure that, the NATO alliance is strong, that our allies are strong, and that strength is what, as we mentioned, is what's going to guarantee the peace. Russia will not challenge NATO because our European allies will be strong, and the United States will be equally strong. But can I guarantee that? I don't know. I mean, the challenge with some of our adversaries, especially, I think the Russians, is they tend to be reckless, and they're unpredictable, and that makes it hard to predict what they're going to do, and that's why the strength is even more important.
So we talked about Africa. This conference here is really focused on the Middle East and Africa. And so if we think of Europe as a developed world, and we want peace in the Middle East and solutions in the Middle East, we want to see a peaceful growth in Africa with more than 1 billion people coming. It's hard to point at Europe here as a role model for them unless we step back and say the leaders in these countries don't want to repeat the mistakes that we've seen in Europe. How do we resolve this situation?
Well, I mean, I think there are some good things that we're doing at NATO regarding both Africa and the Middle East. We have two longstanding partnership platforms. We have the what's known as the Istanbul Cooperation Initiative, which UAE is part of, Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, and then we have the Mediterranean Dialogue, which is Algeria, Egypt, Israel, Jordan, Mauritania, Morocco, and Tunisia. And those provide, I think, cooperation, defense capacity building, diplomacy opportunities, but most importantly, a chance for those countries to dialogue on defense related issues that I think will should bring them closer together, cooperating. And NATO, I think, is the perfect platform to do that, to train militaries, to standardize militaries, and to not have them pointing at each other instead of working collaboratively to defend each other's interests. So, I mean, I think there is hope. I don't think you just say that that Europe is somehow failed. I mean, with the United States engagement over the last 80 years, there has not been a war in NATO territory. Obviously, the Ukraine war is not part of NATO territory. It just touches a lot of NATO territory. And so it's relevant to what we're doing in Europe and in the Euro-Atlantic space. But I think there's a lot of things that we can work with our partners in the Middle East and in Africa on, including counterterrorism, cyber and maritime security, critical infrastructure resilience, which is becoming more and more important. One of the things we did in the Hague Defense Commitment, and the 5% headline number that's so important, is that some of that money is going to go to protecting our societies against hybrid threats, against hacking and of critical infrastructure, to make sure that we can have military mobility and dual purpose infrastructure. I mean, there's so much good that's happening and getting people ready. But I will tell you, I've spent some time recently in Finland and Sweden, and their all of society approach is, I think, is a direction we might all want to think about getting, where in Finland everybody's essentially a reserve military member. Everyone's trained. They receive kind of how to be ready in case of a conflict. It's a societal readiness that we have in the United States. We have that same program. I just don't think it's as well accepted, as well adopted, and certainly the military training is not something that we've implemented. But that's how a country like Finland that shares 1,400 kilometers of border with Russia and fought the Winter War in 1939. I think that's where we all need to be. We all need to be ready. We need to make sure our societies are ready. We need to explain why we're investing all this money, because this is not insignificant dollars. When you talk about 5% and equalizing with the United States, I mean, you're talking about probably $400 to $500 billion a year more on defense, and that's real money. And if you don't have growing economies, if you don't have prosperity, if you don't have a system that encourages entrepreneurs to start businesses and to take risk, it's going to be hard to fund long term.
So, Matt, I want to thank you for flying in to visit us here today.
It's my pleasure.
You play an extremely important role, and I wanted people watching us online or here to hear your views. When I step back and think of the Milken Institute that's coming up to its finished its fourth decade and into its fifth, our goal was, can we help create meaningful lives for people? Can we find access to capital or financial incentives that change people's goals, etc.? In leaving here today, if we found that we made progress in the next year, what are the key elements that occurred that we might have toned down the risk in the world? What has happened? What would you like to see happen? But what has happened in the next year if we sat here, that you would say we made a lot of progress?
I think the most important thing that would show progress is peace in Ukraine, is ending that conflict. I think, to me, that occupies a lot of everyone's time, not only in the U.S., but in Europe and globally. I think that would be important. I think certainly figuring out how to reduce regulations again, because I'm focused on Europe, this is what I think about a lot, but reducing regulation, not having protectionist trade policies, really having free and fair trade, once and for all. I think that would be a platform for great growth across the globe. And I think also a more conversations among not only allies, because we talk to each other a lot, but also conversations with people that maybe we don't like or don't get along with in the past, and to resolve those historic animosity among peoples, to have a real kind of situation where we try to resolve conflict. And that's one of the things that I'm really proud to be part of the Trump administration right now, is because President Trump's a peacemaker. He does not want war. He does not want killing. He doesn't want death, and he wants to resolve conflicts. And he knows that the power of the presidency you have a chance from that platform to do just that. And he's in fact, just today, I think he was bringing a couple of African countries to the White House to sign a peace agreement. And so I think there are some real opportunities with a peacemaker like President Trump in office to resolve that conflict. And I would also, like our allies, for me, I would like the United States to be strong, but I want our allies to be strong, because that advances our way of life and our values and our interests.
So last question, Matt. Obviously, your responsibilities are heavily focused in Europe and NATO. Are there lessons to be learned so we could say a year from now there was peace in the Middle East?
That's. Obviously we have a chance right now, and it's the thing that we have to appreciate is that some of these conflicts, we need to stop framing things as winners and losers. We need to make sure that we understand that it's the ordinary citizen in these places that is the one that benefits from an end to conflict. And so, I think that's, dialogue is going to be important. People talking and resolving these long historical disputes that I've mentioned a couple of times now, and resolving them in a way that doesn't make one person feel like a loser and one person feel like a winner, that resolves it because it's in the best interest of everybody, and can then be a framework and a peace for years to come. Because the enduring peace is the most important thing. Just peace, I think, is often hard to get, especially when you have one stronger and one weaker adversary. But I think you can get a durable peace, and you don't have to relitigate it. That's a lesson out of World War I, right? It was not a durable peace, and so we had World War II, and these are the types of things that I think about a lot in the context of NATO and how we can be a force for good in those dialogues.
So Matt, I rested easier when you took the job. I told you at the start of the year, and hopefully people understand how you see the world, and hopefully next year we'll have the beginning, at least, of an enduring peace. So thank you.
I look forward to it. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you for attending Day 1 of the Milken Institute Middle East and Africa Summit. Please join us for food and drinks on the terrace